The Invisible Woman. The conference room fell silent as Nora Hartwell spread the environmental impact reports across the mahogany table. Her dark hair caught the fluorescent light as she leaned forward, pointing to graphs that most executives would find boring. Julian Blackwood watched from his position at the head of the table, his fingers steepled, pretending to review quarterly projections on his tablet, while his attention remained fixed on the woman who had somehow made carbon footprint analysis sound like poetry. The Riverside development could reduce local air pollution by 37% if we implement these modifications, Nora continued, her voice carrying the kind of conviction that made Julian's chest tighten unexpectedly. She wore a simple navy blazer that had seen better days, yet she commanded the room with more authority than executives wearing suits worth more than most people's cars. Julian had built Blackwood Industries from nothing, transforming it into a renewable energy empire worth $42 billion. He could buy countries, influence elections, and make headlines with a single tweet. Yet here was this environmental lawyer, working as a consultant for a fraction of what she deserved, treating him like any other businessman instead of the media darling who graced magazine covers monthly. Mr. Blackwood, Nora's voice cut through his thoughts. Do you have any concerns about the timeline? Their eyes met across the table, and Julian felt that familiar flutter of panic in his stomach. In her gaze, he saw no calculation, no hidden agenda, just genuine passion for her work and mild curiosity about his opinion. It terrified him. Every other consultant, employee, or business partner looked at him and saw dollar signs. Nora looked at him and saw obstacles to overcome for the greater good. The timeline seems aggressive, he replied coolly, though privately he thought her plan was brilliant. Perhaps we should table this discussion. He watched disappointment flicker across her features before she nodded professionally and began gathering her papers. The other executives filed out, chattering about dinner plans and weekend golf games, but Julian remained seated, watching Nora pack her worn leather briefcase with careful precision. She paused at the door, glancing back. Mr. Blackwood, I know these projects might seem insignificant compared to your larger initiatives, but every small change creates ripples. Sometimes the smallest stones make the biggest waves. After she left, Julian sat alone in the empty conference room, staring at the chair where she had been sitting. He had spent 15 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that isolation was the price of success. But Nora Hartwell, with her passionate speeches about environmental justice and her complete indifference to his wealth, was slowly chipping away at those carefully constructed barriers, and that scared him more than any corporate takeover ever could. Walls built high. Julian stared at the assignment memo on his screen, his cursor hovering over the send button. The Oregon wind farm project would take Nora 3 hours away from the Seattle headquarters, far enough that their paths would rarely cross, close enough that he couldn't be accused of sabotaging her career. His finger trembled slightly as he clicked send. Within minutes, his assistant knocked. Ms. Hartwell is here to see you about the Oregon assignment. Julian straightened his tie and assumed his most professional expression. Send her in. Nora entered with that same determined energy that had captivated him weeks ago, but now Julian forced himself to look past her to the city skyline beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain streaked the glass like tears he refused to acknowledge. Mr. Blackwood, I'm grateful for the Oregon opportunity, but I was wondering if there's a reason you're pulling me from the Riverside project. Her voice carried a note of confusion that made Julian's chest ache. The community impact assessments were showing such promising results. Resource allocation, Julian replied curtly, finally meeting her eyes with practiced indifference. We need our best environmental consultant handling the larger projects. He watched her process this, saw the moment she decided to accept his explanation despite her obvious doubts. Of course. When do I start in Oregon? Monday. The word fell between them like a stone dropping into still water. Nora nodded, gathering herself with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else. I'll have my preliminary reports ready by Wednesday. After she left, Julian loosened his tie and slumped in his leather chair. Through his office's smart glass, he watched Nora cross the lobby 40 floors below, her red umbrella a bright spot against the gray Seattle afternoon. She moved with purpose, even in disappointment, and Julian wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of certainty about anything. 3 weeks later, Julian found himself reading Nora's Oregon reports with the intensity of a man studying sacred texts. Her recommendations were brilliant, integrating the wind farm with local agricultural needs, creating job training programs for displaced workers, establishing wildlife corridors that actually enhanced the ecosystem. She had turned a simple energy project into a model for sustainable community development. But it was her personal notes that undid him. Scrawled in the margins were observations about the families she'd met, the farmers worried about their land, the young people eager for green energy jobs. Nora saw people where Julian saw profit margins, communities where he saw resources. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother Marcus. Saw the Oregon project coverage. Your environmental lawyer is getting national attention. Thought you'd want to know. Julian pulled up the news article, his heart stopping at the photograph of Nora speaking to a group of local residents. She was smiling, genuinely, radiantly, in a way he'd never seen in their sterile corporate meetings. The headline read, "Legal Champion Transforms Corporate Energy Project into Community Victory." She was thriving without him, building the kind of meaningful change she'd always envisioned. And Julian was stuck in his glass tower, further from her than ever, wondering why success felt so much like failure when the person who mattered most was finally getting the recognition she deserved. The breaking point. The community center in Portland's Jade District buzzed with nervous energy as residents filled folding chairs, their faces etched with concern. Nora stood at the front, her laptop connected to a borrowed projector displaying her comprehensive proposal for Blackwood Industries Community Environmental Fund. She had spent 3 months developing this program, working evenings and weekends to create something that could genuinely transform underserved neighborhoods. Julian sat in the back row, having driven down from Seattle unannounced. He wore a baseball cap and simple jacket, hoping to observe unnoticed. But his breath caught as he watched Nora present her vision. Solar panels for low-income housing, urban gardens in abandoned lots, job training and renewable energy trades for unemployed youth. "This isn't just about corporate responsibility," Nora explained to the crowd. "It's about justice. Environmental problems hit the poorest communities first and hardest. But with proper investment and community partnership, we can create lasting change that benefits everyone." An elderly Vietnamese woman raised her hand. "My grandson, he wants to learn this solar work. Your program, it would really train him?" Nora's face lit up. "Not just train him, Mrs. Nguyen. We'd guarantee job placement with our partner companies after certification. Your grandson would have a career in the fastest growing industry in America." Julian felt something crack inside his chest. This was why Nora worked until midnight, why she turned down lucrative offers from larger firms, why she challenged him in every meeting. She saw beyond profit to possibility. The next morning, Julian called Nora into his Seattle office. She arrived clutching a thick folder, her eyes bright with hope. "The Portland presentation went well," she began eagerly. "The community response was overwhelming. If we could start with just 5 neighborhoods, the board rejected the proposal." Julian's voice came out harsher than intended. He couldn't look at her face as he delivered the lie. The board hadn't even seen the proposal. Julian had killed it himself, terrified that approving her program would mean admitting how much he needed her, how completely she had changed his understanding of what his company could become. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Julian finally looked up, Nora's expression had shifted from excitement to something resembling pity. "I see." Her voice was steady, professional. "May I ask what their specific concerns were?" "Budget constraints, risk assessment, the usual factors." Each word tasted like ash. Nora nodded slowly, closing her folder. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been with this company for 8 months. In that time, I've watched you approve a $40 million marketing campaign and a $60 million executive retreat facility. This community program would cost $12 million total over 5 years. Julian said nothing, staring at his hands. "I used to think you were cautious," Nora continued. "Then I thought you were strategic. But now I think you're just afraid. Afraid of what your company could become if you actually let it help people instead of just making money." She stood, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. "I'll submit my resignation letter by end of business today. Thank you for the opportunity to learn what I definitely don't want to become." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like Julian's heart breaking. The empty throne. Julian stood at his office window, watching Seattle's skyline blur through October rain. 37 days had passed since Nora's resignation. He knew because he'd been counting. The quarterly report spread across his desk showed record profits, but the numbers felt meaningless, like counting grains of sand while drowning. His assistant, Rebecca, knocked hesitantly. "Mr. Blackwood, the Portland Wind Farm is requesting an extension on the community impact assessment. They're saying Ms. Hartwell's replacement hasn't submitted the required documentation." "Her replacement?" Julian turned from the window, genuinely confused. "The consultant from Morrison and Associates? The one you approved last month?" Julian barely remembered hiring the man, some corporate environmental lawyer who spoke in buzzwords and saw every project through the lens of liability reduction. Everything Nora wasn't. Give them the extension. Julian returned to staring at the rain. "And Rebecca? Cancel my afternoon meetings." That evening, Julian found himself parked outside the Jade District Community Center. A small sign in the window read, "Free Environmental Law Clinic, Wednesday, 6 to 8 p.m. Through the glass, he could see Nora sitting across from an elderly man, papers spread between them. Her face animated as she explained something in both English and halting Spanish. She looked radiant. Tired, wearing a sweater he recognized from her corporate consulting days, but genuinely happy in a way she never appeared during their business meetings. Julian realized with painful clarity that he had never seen her smile, really smile, when she worked for him. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother Marcus. "Saw the Times article about your former consultant. Pretty impressive what she's doing." Julian's fingers moved automatically to pull up the article. The headline read, "Former corporate lawyer brings environmental justice to Portland's underserved communities." The photograph showed Nora standing with a group of teenagers in hard hats, touring a solar installation training facility. The article described how Nora had used her savings to start a nonprofit, partnering with local organizations to provide exactly the services she'd proposed to Blackwood Industries. She was operating on a shoestring budget, working from a shared office space, driving a 10-year-old Honda. Yet she'd already secured solar panels for 3 apartment complexes and enrolled 23 young people in renewable energy training programs. Her former employer passed on funding this vision, Nora was quoted as saying, "But I learned that sometimes the most important work happens outside corporate boardrooms. Real change requires taking risks that shareholders might not understand." Julian closed his phone and looked back through the community center window. Nora was helping the elderly man fill out paperwork, her pen moving in patient strokes as she guided his shaking hand. She glanced up suddenly, their eyes meeting through the glass. For a moment, Julian thought she might wave, but she simply returned to her work with quiet dignity. Driving home through the rain, Julian understood with devastating clarity what he had lost. Not an employee, not even a consultant. He had lost the one person who challenged him to be better, who saw potential where he saw obstacles, who believed his wealth could heal instead of isolate. For 43 years, Julian had measured success by what he could acquire. Now he realized he had spent 8 months with the rarest treasure imaginable, someone who cared about his character more than his bank account, and he had thrown it away because he was too afraid to believe he deserved to be loved for who he really was. Finding ground. The November rain had stopped by the time Julian found the courage to push open the community center's glass door. The evening legal clinic was winding down, and Nora sat alone at a folding table organizing files by lamplight. She looked up as his footsteps echoed across the linoleum floor, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded politeness. "Mr. Blackwood." She didn't stand, didn't smile. "Are you here about the Morrison consultation? Because I haven't spoken to your replacement about any ongoing cases. I'm not here about business." Julian's voice caught, and he cleared his throat. "May I sit?" Nora gestured to the plastic chair across from her. The same kind of cheap furniture he would have dismissed as beneath notice 6 months ago. Now it felt like the most important seat he'd ever occupied. "I lied to you," he began, the words tumbling out before he could lose his nerve. "The board never saw your community proposal. I killed it myself." Her pen stopped moving across the legal pad. "I see. No, you don't." Julian leaned forward, desperate to make her understand. "For 15 years, every person who walked into my office wanted something from me. Money, connections, opportunities. They smiled and agreed with everything I said because they saw dollar signs, not a person. Nora's expression remained carefully neutral. That must have been difficult. Then you arrived and you treated my $42 billion like an inconvenience, keeping you from real work. Julian laughed bitterly. You argued with me in meetings. You challenged my priorities. You looked at me like I was just another obstacle between you and helping people. Because that's what you were, Nora said quietly. What you chose to be. I was terrified. The admission hung between them like a confession in church. Terrified that if I let myself care about you, you'd eventually figure out I was worth more money than you could imagine, and everything would change. You'd start seeing me the way everyone else does. Nora set down her pen and studied his face. Julian, I Googled you after our third meeting. I know exactly how much you're worth. The words hit him like a physical blow. You knew? Forbes publishes a list every year. Your net worth is public information. Her voice carried a note of gentle exasperation. I knew about your houses, your art collection, your yacht. I just didn't care. Julian stared at her, his carefully constructed worldview crumbling. But the way you talked to me was the way I talk to everyone. Rich or poor, powerful or powerless, people are just people. Nora's voice softened. I was disappointed in you because I could see who you really were underneath all that money. Someone brilliant and capable of incredible good, choosing to play it safe instead of taking risks that matter. The community center fell silent except for the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Julian felt 15 years of protective walls dissolving, leaving him exposed but somehow lighter. I've been miserable without you, he whispered. Not because you worked for me, but because you made me want to be worthy of the man you thought I could become. Nora reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. That man was always there, Julian. You just needed to decide he was worth the risk. Outside, Seattle's lights twinkled like stars, and Julian understood that some treasures couldn't be bought, only earned through the courage to be genuinely seen.